A human boy carried the injured alien girl to school daily, never realizing her mother controlled the galaxy. The first morning it happened, Kale Ortega was already late. He had overslept by 11 minutes, his phone alarm had failed him again, the one he'd been meaning to replace for 3 semesters, and he was halfway down the external staircase of Thornfield Hall when he heard the sound. Not a cry. Not quite. More like a controlled exhale of someone refusing to make noise, which somehow carried farther than a noise would have. He stopped on the landing between the second and third floors. She was sitting against the outer wall of the building, on the concrete edge of the stairwell's lower platform. Her leg was extended in front of her at an angle that explained the exhale. She had pale blue-gray skin and silver hair worn loose, which meant she was Vithrani, one of the 8 exchange students currently enrolled at Carver University under the newly signed Interplanetary Cultural Exchange Charter, which the student newsletter had covered in approximately 900 words of breathless optimism 2 months ago. She was wearing a gray jacket and dark trousers, and she was staring at her extended leg with the focused expression of someone conducting a damage assessment. Kale looked at the leg, then at the stairs below, where a patch of black ice was still melting in the early morning light. "That looks like it hurts," he said. She looked up at him. Her eyes were silver with a pale violet ring around the iris, and her expression was not surprise exactly, more like the particular resignation of someone who had been hoping not to be seen. "I slipped," she said. Her voice was careful and even the consonants precisely placed. "I am managing it." "Okay," Kale said. "Then, do you need to get somewhere?" "I have a 9 o'clock lecture." He looked at his watch. It was 8:43. Her extended leg had a visible compression brace around the lower shin, the kind from the campus medical center, not fresh, but not old either. Something that had been there a few days at least. "Which building?" She blinked once. "Faraday Hall." Faraday Hall was across the quad, and up the incline past the library. On a good day, a brisk 7-minute walk. On an injured leg, on ice-glazed paths, in 17 minutes, not impossible, but not comfortable. Kale adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder. "I'm going that direction," he said, which was about 60% true. His first lecture was in Morrow Building, which was 1 building past Faraday. "Can you walk if I give you something to hold on to?" She looked at his offered arm the way someone examines an unfamiliar document, with attention, without immediate commitment. "I don't want to inconvenience you," she said. "You won't," Kale said. "I've already got the arm." A pause, then she reached up and took it. Her grip was careful but real. She was light when he helped her upright, lighter than he'd expected, and she held herself very straight once standing, the kind of posture that came from somewhere, habit or training, the automatic spine straightening of someone who had been told not to let pain show. She was a few inches shorter than him, and the compression brace took most of her weight on the first step without complaint. They walked across the quad together. She did not make further noise about the leg. He did not bring it up. "I'm Kale," he said, when they were past the library. "I know," she said, and then seemed to reconsider. "I have heard your name." "You are in the Environmental Systems seminar." Yeah, he had in fact seen her there. She sat in the second row, slightly to the right of center, and she asked questions with the same careful precision she was now applying to walking. "I didn't catch yours." She paused for exactly 1 beat. "Cyril." Just the one name, he didn't push. He got her to Faraday Hall with 4 minutes to spare. She released his arm at the door with a formal, small incline of her head, not quite a bow, not quite a nod, something Vithrani that he didn't know the name for. "Thank you," she said. "Same time tomorrow," Kale said, already turning back toward Morrow Building at a pace that was now definitively a jog. He said it as a joke, or mostly a joke, a courteous way to close the exchange without making it into a whole thing. He didn't really expect her to be there. She was there. 7:45. Same stairwell landing, different spot on the wall, further from the ice, which was already receding under the morning sun. But the leg still needed a reason to stop on the stairs and rest. She had her bag with her this time, slung over one shoulder, and she looked up when she heard his footsteps with the expression of someone who had considered several alternatives and arrived at this one through elimination. "Faraday again?" Cale asked. "Environmental systems today," she said. "Morrow building." "Me too," he said, and this time it was actually true. It became a routine before either of them consciously acknowledged it as one. Cale was not naturally a morning person, but he had spent 22 years becoming functional in the mornings through sheer stubbornness, so adjusting his departure by 15 minutes was not a hardship. He told himself it wasn't an adjustment at all. He was simply leaving earlier, which was generally a good idea on a campus with unreliable ice conditions in November. That he happened to arrive at the Thornfield stairwell at approximately the same time each morning was coincidental. He suspected Cyril had a similar story she was telling herself. The campus medical center had given her the compression brace after a fall in her third week on campus. She mentioned this, eventually, in the fractional way she offered all personal information, one clause at a time, with pauses between, as though checking that each piece had been received before releasing the next. The fall had been on stairs not unlike these. The damage was to the connective tissue at the side of her right knee, which was in the process of repairing itself, but required stabilization and careful weight management in the interim. "How long?" Cale asked on the fourth morning. "Another 3 to 4 weeks," she said, "at current regenerative rate." "Current regenerative rate," he repeated. "How fast do you normally regenerate?" A pause. "Faster than this," she said, which was not quite an answer. He filed it under V-Thrani biology, details TBD, and didn't pursue it. He was learning that Cyril had a particular texture to the things she didn't say, not evasiveness, exactly, more like careful curation. She had things she was keeping track of. He didn't know what they were yet, but he could feel the architecture of them when she went still in that particular way between sentences. They walked to lectures together in the mornings and, when schedules aligned, back across the quad in the evenings. She held his arm on steps and inclines. She walked independently on the flat stretches, though she didn't release his arm. She asked him questions about Earth systems, about how the local grid was managed, about watershed treatment, about the chemistry of road ice, with genuine interest and no pretension of prior knowledge. She had a way of asking things that suggested she was building a careful mental model with each answer, cataloging each piece in a system Cale couldn't see but could almost feel operating. He asked her about V-Thrani water systems on the 8th morning, because he'd been thinking about it, and she became unexpectedly animated. Not louder, but more detailed, the words coming slightly closer together, the careful spacing of her usual delivery replaced by something more like enthusiasm, moving fast enough to briefly outrun caution. "The primary distribution architecture on the third continent of Verath Prime," she said, "is based on a mineral channel system that's 3,000 years old. They have been patching it for 300 years rather than replacing it, because the mineral channels themselves have become part of the regional ecosystem. The patch systems are more sophisticated than the original infrastructure at this point." A pause. "It is a very human problem, actually." "Very human." "The original builders would not recognize it," she said. "But it still works, and something that lives in the old channels depends on it now. So the problem of changing it has become more complicated than the problem of keeping it." Cale thought about that for the rest of the walk. "Is that a critique?" "It's an observation," she said. "I find it compelling, the willingness to adapt around something rather than replace it. Earth engineers do the same thing." "Is it different on Verath?" Another of her pauses, this one slightly longer, with a quality he was beginning to recognize as not hesitation but calibration. She was deciding how much of something to say. Somewhat, she said, finally. Large infrastructure decisions on Vareth Prime require ratification through several governing tiers. It is less spontaneous. Sounds slower. It is slower, she said. It is also less likely to damage something irreplaceable. He looked at her sideways. She was watching the path ahead, expression neutral, her hand light on his arm. You sound like someone who's had opinions about infrastructure policy for a while, he said. A fractional pause. I have observed it for some time, she said, in various contexts. She fell on the 14th day. Not badly. She caught herself against the outer railing of the stairwell before she went down, and it cost her a scrape along the heel of her hand and an involuntary sharp exhale. But the hand was bleeding, and the knee had been wrenched sideways, and she was leaning against the railing with her eyes closed, and her jaw set when Cale arrived 30 seconds later. Okay, he said, taking stock. We're going to the campus medical center. I have a 9 o'clock. Cyril. She opened her eyes. He didn't say anything else. She looked at him for a moment with those silver-violet eyes, and then something in her posture changed. Not collapsing, exactly, more like a small permission granted to itself. All right, she said. He didn't offer his arm this time. He put his arm around her properly, taking the weight she'd been managing on her own for 2 weeks, and she let him. The medical center was on the ground floor of Ashby Hall, 5 minutes away. She held herself straight the whole way, which he'd come to understand was not performance but something structural in her. The spine straightening wasn't hiding. It was something she needed. The campus nurse, Dr. Fallon, looked up when they came in and did not visibly react to Cyril's coloring or her eyes or the silver white of her hair, which Cale respected. She had been Carver's campus physician for 16 years and presumably had seen most things. Twisted it again, she said rather than asked. Stairs, Cyril said. Same knee, Cyril nodded. Dr. Fallon examined it with the efficient care of someone who has done this many times and settled in. I'd like to see you in twice a week until this heals properly. The original damage was more extensive than it looked. Your tissue density is different from baseline human, so the imaging took a few days to recalibrate, and we now think you've been understating the severity. I have been managing it, Cyril said. I'm aware, Dr. Fallon said. You've been doing it quite impressively. The young man carrying you to class every morning is presumably helping. Cyril glanced at Cale. He looked at the wall, which had a poster about flu vaccinations that he found suddenly interesting. He does not carry me, Cyril said precisely. He provides support on stairs and inclines. Of course, Dr. Fallon said, with the tone of someone who had noted both statements and found them complimentary. She wrapped the knee with a fresh brace, cleaned the hand, and sent them out with the twice-weekly appointment scheduled and a set of instructions she handed to both of them, which Cale suspected was deliberate. They stood outside Ashby Hall in the thin November sun. Cyril looked at the instruction sheet. The 9 o'clock will have started, she said. I've got the notes from last session, Cale said. I'll send them to you tonight. She folded the instruction sheet carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. Then she looked at him, the kind of look that had something behind it, something she was deciding whether to voice. You don't have to do this, she said. The walking, the morning and evening, you choose to do it and it is, I am aware of it. I want you to know that. I know you're aware of it, Cale said. That's not why I do it. Why do you do it? He shrugged, which was honest. Because I noticed you needed help and I had an arm. I don't know that it's more complicated than that. She looked at him for another moment. Then she inclined her head, the small, precise incline that he'd seen before on the first morning, and had been quietly trying to decode ever since. Veloran, she said quietly. What's that? A Vithrani term, she said. It doesn't translate cleanly. It refers to an action that reveals something true about the person who does it. A small act that is, in fact, large. A pause. Not a compliment exactly, an observation. You make a lot of observations, Kale said. I do, she agreed. It is what I was trained for. She didn't explain that, but she let it sit in the air between them, and he let it sit there too, and they walked back to Thornfield in the November light with her hand in the crook of his arm. By the end of the third week, Kale had, without particularly planning to, begun to learn Vithrani. Not systematically. He had no textbook and no formal instruction. The university offered a Vithrani language module, but it was at capacity, and the wait list was long. What he had was proximity. Cyril used words and phrases in her first language occasionally, not as correction or instruction, but as the natural overflow of someone who had two working languages and sometimes reached for the more precise one. When she named things, a quality, a relationship, a concept, she named them in the language that had a word for them, and then explained. He wrote them down, not conspicuously. He had a back page of his seminar notebook where they accumulated. Varathsine, the anchor requirement, the calibration need, what the Kelvari commander in Cyril's History of Interplanetary Governance seminar had needed from the frontier engineer in the account she described in passing. Velsarath, moving with the weight rather than against it, the way you carry something you can't put down. Velorin, the act that reveals something true about the person who does it. Sarath, warmth, the particular quality of a place that has been lived in long enough to carry its inhabitants. He didn't tell her he was writing them down. It felt like something to do quietly, the way you do something you're not sure has a name yet. She noticed on the 19th morning. They were on the covered walkway between the library and Faraday Hall, and he had pulled out his seminar notebook for a note about a lecture point, and she had seen the back page over his shoulder. She was quiet for a moment. He didn't close the notebook. You have been collecting them, she said. They're useful terms, he said. English doesn't have equivalents. She was quiet again, with a quality that was slightly different from her usual calibration pauses, more internal, as though something was being adjusted in a system that ran deeper than the usual one. Most people, she said, find Vithrani conceptual vocabulary abstract. It's not abstract, Kale said. Velorin is extremely specific. It's just specific about something that doesn't get named a lot. He put the notebook away. What's the word for a route you take regularly enough that it stops feeling like a choice? She thought about it. You are describing *Sorathkeln*, she said. A path that has become a path because you have walked it. A pause. It carries connotations of rightness. A path walked enough times becomes the correct path, not merely the habitual one. That's different from habit. Yes, she said, it is different from habit. She looked at him sideways briefly. You are thinking about something. The Thornfield stairwell, he said, as a Sorathkeln. She was quiet for a moment. You could argue it, she said. I think I could, he said. They walked the rest of the way to Faraday in the kind of silence that had, over 19 mornings, become a different kind of thing from ordinary silence. The particular quiet of two people who do not need to fill the space between them because the space is already doing something. The fourth week, Cyril brought him something. It was a small object, flat, dark, roughly palm-sized, and not obviously made of any material he recognized. She produced it from her jacket pocket on the stairwell landing and held it out with the precise matter-of-factness she applied to most transactions. A reader, she said. It holds Vithrani academic texts. I have loaded the environmental systems catalog, infrastructure, water management, regulatory history. The interface is in English and Vithrani. You can switch between them. He took it. It was heavier than it looked and slightly warm, as though it had been used. Thank you, he said. The regulatory history section, she said, has an extended account of the mineral channel remediation decision on the third continent, the one we discussed. The primary account is in old formal Vithrani, which is significantly different from modern spoken, but there are annotated translations. Did you annotate them? A pause. Some, she said. The existing annotations were not complete. He turned the reader over in his hands. I'll start with the mineral channels, he said. That would be my recommendation, she said. He looked up at her. She was watching the path ahead, her expression composed, the silver white of her hair catching the November light in the stairwell. He thought about the back page of his seminar notebook, about Soreth Keln and the path that becomes the right path, about Veloren, which was an observation about something true, made precisely. Cyril, he said. She looked at him. Thank you for the reader, he said. Really. She held his gaze for a moment. You are collecting things, she said. It seemed appropriate to give you something to collect them with. The 5th week was when the weight of the term began to be visible, not in Cyril, who maintained her composure with the same structural integrity she had maintained from the beginning, but in the air around the things she said and didn't say. She was attending every lecture. Her assessments, when results came back, were thorough. The knee was improving measurably. She was, by any external measure, completing the term precisely as the empress had specified. But she had begun occasionally, at dinner or in the library alcove, to say things and then stop in the middle of them, and to do the calibration pause, and to say something slightly different from what the first thing had been going to be. Cale noticed. He was learning to notice, in the same slow way he'd been learning Vithrani words by accumulation, one instance at a time, until the pattern was clear. On a Tuesday evening in the library, she stopped in the middle of a sentence about Vithrani atmospheric modeling, and was quiet for long enough that he put down the reader she had given him. What is it? He said. She looked at the table. Her hands were still. I have been in contact with the term review committee, she said, for the exchange program. They are processing extension requests for the spring semester. He waited. The program allows for one extension, she said, with the careful precision of someone reporting facts that are not quite only facts. A second term in the same host institution. It requires a formal request and approval from both institutions, and a pause from the sovereignty. From your mother, Cale said. Yes. Have you asked her? Not yet, she said. I have been preparing the request. Another pause. The framing of a request to my mother requires significant preparation. The arguments need to be structured in a particular order. She is attentive to what comes first. What would come first in this one? Cyril was quiet for a moment. The academic case, she said. There are 2 seminar sequences that run over both semesters and a final thesis project that benefits from the full year. The environmental systems faculty have indicated they would support an extension application. She looked at the table. That would be the first argument. And the second? A pause. The second would be more complicated to articulate, she said. He sat with that for a moment. The library was quiet around them, the golden lamp light in the alcove doing what it always did. What would you want it to say? He asked, not pushing, genuinely wanting to know. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, that I have found something here that is worth continuing, she said. The seminar work, the reading, the conversations. A pause. The Soreth Keln. He heard the word and recognized it. The path walked enough times to become the right path. You could say that, he said. In a formal request to the Empress of 11 star systems, she said, it would need to be phrased with somewhat more precision. You're good at precise phrasing, Cale said. She looked up at him. The silver violet of her eyes in the lamplight had the quality of something not quite neutral, something that was present in a way that was not its usual composed presence. I am trying to decide, she said, how honest to be. About the Soreth Keln. About what I am actually asking for, she said. When I asked to stay, a pause. I have been thinking about it. The first argument is the academic case. The third argument would be practical continuity, the thesis project, the faculty relationships. The second argument is the one I am working on. He thought about the back page of his notebook, and the reader in his bag, and 6 weeks of mornings across the quad. Write the second argument honestly, he said. She's going to read it carefully regardless. You might as well have it say what you mean. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said quietly, I think so too. 3 things happened in the same week, later in November. The first was that Cyril's knee began genuinely improving. Dr. Fallen's twice-weekly sessions were evidently helping, and the healing rate, which Cyril referred to in her careful numerical way as approaching expected baseline, had increased enough that she could navigate flat surfaces without needing support. The stairs and the incline she still took carefully, and she still met Cale at the Thornfield landing in the mornings, but the dynamic had shifted slightly. She was less leaning, more choosing. He noticed the difference. He didn't remark on it. The second was that he had dinner with the Vithrani student group on a Thursday evening, at an invitation extended through Cyril with the same fractional information style she applied to most things. I will be having dinner with some of the others on Thursday. If you are free, it would be acceptable. A pause. They would find it informative to speak with a human environmental systems student. Several of them are in related fields. He spent 3 hours at a long table in the International Students' Common Room, eating something that tasted remarkably like a form of risotto and learning more about Vithrani civil engineering than he had known existed. He also learned that most of the Vithrani students knew who Cyril was in a way that was slightly more than classmate familiar, and that she had a way of conducting herself among them that was slightly more than peer familiar, though he couldn't have pointed to any single gesture that made it so. The third thing was the ship. It appeared in low orbit on a Wednesday morning, not dramatically, not with lights or announcement, but through the university's astronomy club livestream that someone in the environmental systems seminar had been watching on their phone during a lecture break. A Vithrani vessel, one of the sovereignty class, which Cale's phone helpfully informed him when he looked it up during lunch, were not diplomatic couriers or exchange transports but administrative flagships. The kind of ship that moved people of significant rank. It had been there since Tuesday evening, someone in the astronomy club's forum said, hovering in geosynchronous orbit over roughly this longitude, awaiting something or someone. Cale found Cyril in the library that afternoon, in the corner alcove where she'd started spending her study hours. She had mentioned once that it was the quietest spot with the best light, both of which were true. There's a ship, he said. She looked up from her tablet. Her expression was, for a fraction of a second, different from anything he'd seen on her face before, not quite alarm, but a kind of resigned anticipation, the look of someone who has been quietly counting down to something. Then it smoothed. I know, she said. He sat down across from her. Do you want to talk about it? A pause, one of the calibration pauses. She set down her tablet. What would you like to know? She asked. Whatever you want to tell me, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the library window, the late afternoon light was going golden, and somewhere above it, just past the visible blue, a flagship-class vessel was holding position. My mother, Cyril said, is impatient. Cale waited. She gave me 3 months, Cyril said, to complete a term of study here without intervention, without the apparatus. Another pause. This was, I understood, a significant concession on her part. She is not accustomed to waiting for outcomes she could simply arrange. Who is she? Cale asked, though something in his chest had begun to assemble the answer from the pieces that had been accumulating for weeks. The posture, the calibrated information, the precision of her questions about infrastructure and governance, the way the other Vithrani students held themselves slightly differently around her without seeming to notice they were doing it. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Empress Soval Varath, she said, Varathari sovereignty. She administers a governing territory comprising 11 inhabited star systems and approximately several thousand minor bodies of various classifications. A pause. I am her eldest daughter. I am here under a provisional student exchange arrangement that she negotiated personally, which required 2 senior counselors' signatures and 1 treaty amendment, and which she agreed to under the condition that I complete the term without incident and return when it concluded. The library was very quiet. Somewhere in the shelves a floor heater clicked. The ship, Kale said. The ship is the *Varath Sorrel *, she said. My mother's personal administrative flagship. She has been, a careful pause, monitoring. Monitoring, he said. From orbit, Cyril said, yes. He sat with that for a moment. Outside, the November light had gone a shade deeper. Does she know about the mornings? She knows, Cyril said, with a quality in her voice that might in someone less composed have been something like dry humor, essentially everything. She has a full surveillance briefing 3 times daily. Campus ingress and egress, common area presence, academic attendance, medical center visits. A pause. I believe the morning walks are documented in some detail. And she's been up there watching that. Watching it and not intervening, Cyril said, which, from my mother, constitutes a considerable exercise of restraint. Cale leaned back in his chair. He was not, he thought, processing this as well as he could be. He was aware of it, the way a person is aware of very cold water, but the full scope of it was being absorbed in layers. An empress, 11 star systems, a flagship in orbit documenting the morning walks across the quad. Why are you here? He asked, not harshly. He genuinely wanted to know. Sarah was quiet for a moment in a way that was different from her usual calibration pauses. This one was not about what to say next, but about how to say something she'd had ready for a while. My mother administers 11 systems, she said, and she has done so with remarkable skill for 23 years, but she has administered them from a position above them. She makes decisions about watershed infrastructure, civil engineering, environmental policy, from a flagship or from a palace, through 3 tiers of advisory council, with full briefing packets assembled by people who have also been briefed by other people. A pause. She believes in governance. She does not always believe in proximity. And you do. I believe that the mineral channel system on the 3rd continent is still functional because, 300 years ago, someone looked at what lived in it and decided it was worth working around, Cyril said quietly. I believe that kind of decision requires being near enough to see what lives there. She looked at him. She sent me here because I asked her to. It took 14 months of negotiation. The weight of that, 14 months of negotiation, with an empress for the right to attend a single university term, settled around the sentence like something solid. The ship, Cale said again, it came early. My mother, Cyril said, has a 3 months without incident condition, and the incident she is most concerned about is not academic but medical. She received the Dr. Fallen report. She has standing authorization from the exchange treaty to receive copies of significant medical events concerning exchange students, Cyril said. The knee fall in week 3 triggered it. The second incident 2 weeks ago triggered a more significant response. A pause. I have been managing the communication. Cale stared at her. You have been managing your mother, the empress from a campus library. I have been explaining, Cyril said, with the precise air of someone who is choosing words with great care, that the situation is in hand, that the injury is being treated, that the twice-weekly medical appointments are effective, and that the adaptive assistance being provided by a human student in my building has been beneficial to both recovery and to the academic objectives of the term. Adaptive assistance, he said. You carry my bag on the stairs, she said. It is a precise description. And your mother has read the daily briefings on the adaptive assistants, Cyril said. All of them. Something moved across her face, the careful composure over something that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it. She has opinions. What kind of opinions? The kind that caused her to move the Vareth Sorrel into geosynchronous orbit over this campus, Cyril said, rather than dispatching a medical retrieval team, which was her initial response. She paused. I told her that was not necessary. She compromised. Cale thought about an empress in a flagship reading daily briefings about a 22-year-old environmental systems student walking her daughter across a university campus every morning. He thought about what compromise meant to someone like that. Is she going to land? He asked. She is considering it, Cyril said. I am continuing to advise against. What are you advising? That the term has 3 weeks remaining, Cyril said. That my knee is improving. That I am attending all lectures and completing all assessments without difficulty. And that the situation on the ground, as she refers to it, is adequately managed. Adequately managed, Cale said. It is diplomatic language, she said. I use it with her when I want her to feel she is receiving full information, while also not giving her anything additional to have an opinion about. He looked at her. She looked back at him, with those silver-violet eyes in the library's golden afternoon light, and the composure was entirely intact, but there was something underneath it, something like the way she'd sounded when she talked about mineral channels and things worth working around. I should have told you earlier, she said, not quite an apology, more like a position statement. Probably, he agreed. I was concerned that it would change the dynamic, she said. The mornings. I am aware that is a fairly significant thing to be concerned about, given the context. You were worried if I knew your mother was an empress, I'd stop walking you to class. I was worried, she said carefully, that it would become an arrangement of a different kind, that there would be implications. Expectations. A pause. You carried my bag because it was a reasonable thing to do, because I needed help and you had an arm. I did not want to complicate that. The library was very quiet. It's not complicated, Cale said. No, she said. I know that is somewhat the point. The Vareth Sorrel remained in orbit for 4 days. On the second day, Cyril received a formal communication request, which she showed Cale at dinner in the campus canteen, with the expression of someone presenting evidence in a proceeding they are resigned to participating in. She wants to speak with you, Cyril said. Your mother? Yes. Cale looked at his pasta, on the ship. Via secure channel. She has made the channel available at times of your choosing to minimize disruption to your schedule. A pause. This is, I am told, an accommodation she rarely extends. Does she want to assess whether I'm a threat? She wants to determine, Cyril said with careful precision, your character. She has the briefings, but she prefers primary assessment for anything she considers significant. She considers me significant. Cyril was quiet for a moment. She considers the context significant, she said, which was not a contradiction. Cale thought about it while he finished his pasta. Then, would she speak Vithrani or does she have a translator? She speaks several Earth languages, Cyril said, including yours with considerable proficiency. Of course she does, Cale said. Okay. Okay. Cyril looked at him with a slight quality of surprise, which on her face was very subtle, a fractional widening, a small loosening of the composure's edge. She's your mother, Cale said. She's been sitting in orbit reading briefings about me walking you to class. The least I can do is say hello. Another of the calibration pauses. This one was longer than usual, and had a quality that he had not encountered in her before, something that was working through a recalibration of its own. You're not alarmed, she said. Should I be? Most people, she said slowly, When they learn that someone they know is the eldest daughter of the empress of the Varathari sovereignty, who controls 11 star systems and is currently in geosynchronous orbit in a flagship, become a little more formal. Considerably more formal, she said. Kale thought about it. I'm on a first-name basis with a woman whose mother controls 11 star systems, he said. I think I'd like to stay on a first-name basis, if that's all right. She looked at him for a long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. A very small, very precise movement. The same fractional smile he had first seen around the 11th morning, but more settled than that one had been. It's all right, she said. The conversation with Empress Soval Varath of the Varathari sovereignty took place in Cyril's room in Thornfield Hall, via a communications interface that appeared on a device Cyril produced from her bag, slim, dark, considerably more sophisticated than anything available in the campus electronics store. The connection opened at a time Kale had selected, 7 in the evening, on the grounds that he had finished his coursework by then, and was not nervous, which was approximately true. The Empress looked like Cyril, was his first thought. The same bone structure, the same silver-white hair, though worn more elaborately, coiled and structured in a way that suggested formality rather than practicality. Her skin was the same blue-gray but deeper, and her eyes were silver-violet and considerably more immediate than anything the daily briefings had presumably been able to convey. She was sitting in what was visible behind her as a very large, very austere room, clean lines, dark materials, the functional aesthetic of a working flagship rather than a palace. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. He looked back. Kale Ortega, she said. Her English was precise and unaccented and completely unfamiliar in its cadence. A learned language applied with the same thoroughness her daughter applied to everything. Empress Varath, he said. A pause. You are not alarmed. Your daughter mentioned I might not be, he said. Something moved across the Empress's face, small, contained, but there. She mentioned this. She seemed to think it was notable. It is, the Empress said. Somewhat. She studied him for another moment with the focused attention of someone conducting an assessment they have thought about carefully in advance. You have been walking my daughter to her lectures every morning for 6 weeks. We walked together, Kale said. She needed support on stairs while the knee was bad. I live in the same building and was going the same direction. Every morning. More or less. And in the evenings. When schedules work out, he said. The Empress was quiet for a moment. I have read the briefings, she said. The morning walks, the medical center, the dinner on the Thursday evening. The library study sessions. A pause. You carried her bag on the steeper inclines. It was the sensible thing to do, Kale said. She needed both hands for the railing. Yes, the Empress said, with something in her voice that he couldn't fully read, not warm exactly, not its opposite either, something that was in the process of completing a calculation. My daughter tells me you knew none of this. Not until 4 days ago, he said. And now that you do. Kale thought about Cyril at the library table, the late afternoon light, the composure over something that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it. The mineral channels and the things worth working around. The Veloran she had named quietly on the walk back from the medical center. I walked her to her 9 o'clock this morning, he said. Same as usual. The knee's a lot better, she mostly doesn't need the arm anymore. We argued about whether electromagnetic pulse shielding in civilian water treatment infrastructure should be standard or optional. A pause. She thinks it should be mandatory. She's probably right. The Empress looked at him for a long moment. She is usually right, she said. I know, he said. Another pause. The Empress's hands, which had been still on the surface of the desk before her, shifted slightly, a small movement that reminded him of something, and then he realized it reminded him of Cyril's hands on the medical center visit, when something had been decided and the decision had been released into the room. My daughter asked me, the Empress said, to conduct this conversation in a way that does not imply threat or obligation. She was very specific. She specified it 3 times. That sounds like her, Kale said. It does, the Empress agreed. A pause. She has been specific about a great many things regarding this term, about what she needed and what she did not need, about the conditions under which she would find it productive. Something moved in the Empress's expression, something careful and genuine and not meant for the briefing record. She has not often been this specific about her own needs. Kale didn't say anything to that. He thought it was a thing to receive rather than to answer. I would like to know, the Empress said, what you intend. Now that you know. The same thing I intended before, Kale said, to get to lectures on time, to send her the seminar notes when she misses something, to argue about infrastructure policy, to not drop her bag on the stairs. He paused. She's my friend. That doesn't change because I know more context about her. She is the heir to 11 systems, the Empress said. She's also the person who told me about the 3,000-year-old mineral channels at 8:45 in the morning while we were sliding across an icy campus, Kale said. She's both things at once. I don't think those are in conflict. The Empress looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the small, precise movement he was beginning to understand, was a family inheritance. No, she said. They are not. She asked him 3 more questions, about his field of study, about his post-graduation intentions, about what he thought of Vithrani water management systems. He answered them honestly. She listened in the way he was learning to recognize as a characteristic that ran in certain bloodlines, the quality of attention that wasn't waiting for its turn to speak, but was genuinely cataloging what arrived. On the water management question, he mentioned the mineral channels, and her expression did something very small, not surprise, but the way a person looks when a reference arrives from an unexpected direction, and they are recalibrating accordingly. She told you about the 3rd continent, the Empress said. On the 8th morning, he said. She had strong opinions about patch systems versus replacement cycles. She has had strong opinions about the 3rd continent, the Empress said, since she was 9 years old. She submitted a formal policy brief to my infrastructure council at age 12. The council was uncertain how to respond. How did you respond? I told the council, the Empress said, with a precision that reminded him, again, of a voice he knew better, to read it carefully, because she was right. A pause. She has a particular quality of attention to things that are old and functional and worth preserving. It is not a quality that is always valued in governance frameworks that favor efficiency. But you value it, Kale said. The Empress looked at him for a moment. I do, she said. It is not always comfortable to value it. It makes certain decisions more complicated. A pause that had in it something very slightly like her daughter's calibration pauses. I sometimes find it is easier to consult the efficiency models. She mentioned that, Kale said, the governing from above problem. She mentioned this. She mentioned it in the way she mentions things, he said, as an observation, without criticism specifically, but specifically. Something moved across the Empress's face that was not quite a smile but was in the same family. Yes, she said, that is how she mentions things. She was quiet for a moment. She applied for this term 14 months before you met her. The application required amendments to 2 standing exchange protocols and a formal review by my senior counsel. 3 of them recommended against it. On what grounds? Security concerns, she said. Continuity of line protocols. The heir is not ordinarily permitted unsupervised absence from Vareth Prime of longer than 48 hours. She paused. She argued that the purpose of preparing an heir for governance is to produce someone capable of independent judgment. That independent judgment requires independent experience. That experience obtained only within supervised frameworks produces models rather than understanding. A pause. She submitted 7 formal responses to the council's objections. Each one precisely targeted the specific argument it was answering. She spent 14 months on it. She mentioned the 14 months, Kale said. She didn't mention the 7 responses. She would consider the 7 responses a detail, the Empress said. The outcome is what she would mention. A pause. She is correct that it is the relevant information. I find, nevertheless, that the 7 responses are also relevant. He thought about that. About a 12-year-old submitting infrastructure policy briefs. About 14 months of precisely targeted arguments. About someone who had sat on a stairwell landing and said, I have been managing it with the focused expression of someone conducting a damage assessment, and had meant it in a way that went considerably further than a knee injury. She does the work, Kale said. Even when she doesn't say she's doing the work. Yes, the Empress said, it is one of her characteristics. A pause, and yours, I am told. He looked at her. The notes, the Empress said. When she missed lectures, the bag on the inclines, the twice-weekly medical appointments she attended more consistently when you accompanied her to the first one and mentioned you were going past the medical center in passing. She paused. The mention was noted in the briefing as appearing on review to have been somewhat deliberate. She needed to go, Kale said. She wasn't going to go on her own. No, the Empress said. She was not. Something in her expression had settled into something more direct. I will tell you something that is not in the briefings, Kale Ortega, because it does not belong in a briefing. I approved this term because she asked for it well, and the arguments were sound. I kept the Varath Sorrel in orbit initially because the medical reports concerned me. I kept it in orbit after the first week because, a pause, measured, the briefings were more informative than I anticipated. About the walks, he said. About my daughter, she said, conducting herself exactly as herself, without apparatus and without court and without protocol, and finding in that condition, she paused and chose the word with deliberate care, Sarath warmth. He recognized the word, from Cyril's voice weeks ago in passing. The particular quality of a place that has been lived in long enough to carry its inhabitants. She used that word, he asked. She did not use it, the Empress said. It is my characterization of what the briefings described. A pause. She would not have used it directly. She would have observed around it. She would have described specific morning temperatures and the condition of the stairwell ice and the improvement in Dr. Fallen's calibration of V-Thrani tissue density, and the accumulated picture of those observations would have implied the larger thing without naming it. She looked at him. She is better at naming it than she used to be. He thought about Velorin outside the medical center, about Soreth Keln in the covered walkway, about the library alcove and the extension application, and the second argument. She's working on it, he said. I know, the Empress said, and there was in those 2 words something that was not the Empress speaking but a mother, specifically, who had been reading briefings for 6 weeks in orbit. I received the extension request this morning. He looked at her. She submitted it at 6:15, the Empress said. Before the ship left orbit, she did not tell me she was submitting it. A pause. The second argument was specific. He didn't ask what it said. He thought Sarah would tell him, or not, in her own way and her own time. I have approved it, the Empress said, with one condition. He waited. That she continues to attend the twice-weekly medical appointments until Dr. Fallen confirms full healing, the Empress said. The condition is genuine and not a diplomatic pretext. I am aware it is also not a significant imposition. A pause. I am capable of approving things without imposing conditions. I simply find, in this case, the condition worth stating. I'll walk her to the appointments, Kale said. The Empress looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said, I expect you will. At the end, she said, I will be in orbit for 2 more days. If there is a medical event requiring intervention, please notify me directly through this device. A pause. If there is not, I will return to Vareth Prime. The spring term begins in 8 weeks. I'll keep an eye on the knee, Kale said. Yes, the Empress said, and then with the smallest possible tonal shift, barely audible but there. Thank you. After the call, Cyril was quiet for a while, not in the calibration way, but in the way of someone who has done something that required significant preparation and is now sitting with the fact of having done it. She told him about the extension approval at dinner the same evening, when he brought 2 plates back from the canteen counter and set one in front of her. She told him the way she told most things, 1 clause at a time, allowing each piece to land. She told him about the second argument precisely, that there were academic benefits to the spring continuation, that the thesis project would be stronger for the full year, and that she had found in the first term a quality of engagement with the work, and with people doing the work that was, she had written, apparently, worth continuing, as a matter of both academic and personal understanding. She did not tell him what the Empress had said about it. He didn't ask. She approved it, Kale said. With one condition, Cyril said, and told him about the medical appointments. I'll walk you to the next one, he said. It is Thursday at 2, she said. I know your Thursday schedule. I can move the 2 o'clock, he said. She looked at him across the canteen table with those silver-violet eyes, and the composure was fully intact, but what was underneath it was closer to the surface than it had been on any of the other 20-odd mornings he had looked at her. You don't have to, she said. I know, he said, same as always. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her fork with the particular decisiveness of someone who has completed a thing and is now prepared to continue with the next thing. I told you, she said, that Veloran does not translate cleanly. You did, he said. There is a second part of the definition, she said, that I did not include the first time, because it requires the accumulation of more than one instance before it applies. She set down the fork and looked at him directly. It is not only the act that reveals something true about the person who does it. It is also, when the instances are sufficient in number, the pattern that reveals something true about the relationship between the person who does it and the person who receives it. He thought about that. How many instances do you need? It is not a numerical threshold, she said. It is a qualitative assessment when the pattern is clear. She looked at him steadily. The pattern is clear. He sat with that. Outside the canteen windows, the campus was going dark and amber in the evening light, and in orbit the Vareth Sorrel was presumably making preparations to depart. And across a table in the canteen, a conversation was settling into something that was going to be there in the morning, the same as the stairwell and the quad and the library alcove. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, with a fractional not fractional smile, and picked up her fork again. The Vareth Sorrel left orbit on a Friday morning. Cyril mentioned it the way she mentioned most things, 1 clause at a time, with the information allowed to settle before anything further arrived. They were on the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floors of Thornfield, the stairwell where it had all begun, and she was descending the stairs with most of her own weight now, using the railing for preference rather than necessity. She left at 6, Cyril said. She had a council session on Vareth Prime she had been deferring. A pause. She said to tell you she found the conversation useful. That's good, Kale said. For her, Cyril said, with a precision that was not criticism, useful is a considerable compliment. They reached the bottom of the stairs and emerged onto the quad. The ice was entirely gone now, November giving way to something slightly less hostile, and the morning light was thin and clean across the buildings. 3 weeks, Kale said. 3 weeks, she agreed. He looked at her sideways. The knee was nearly healed. Dr. Fallen had said another 10 days at V-Thrani regenerative rate. The compression brace was already lighter than it had been, less structural and more precautionary. After 3 weeks, Kale said, you go back. Yes, she said. To 11 systems, he said. Approximately, she said. The 11th is complicated. There's a boundary dispute. He thought about the mineral channels, about things worth working around, about the daily briefings, which had presumably included his full name and department and quite possibly his grades, and an empress in orbit who had said "thank you" in the voice of someone who meant it very specifically. I'll send you the seminar notes, he said, after you leave. If you want. A pause. Environmental systems on Varath Prime, Cyril said slowly, has several practitioners who would find them informative. There is a working group on cross-system regulatory alignment that my mother chairs, with a human systems subcommittee that is currently lacking human voices. Is that a job offer? It is a potential future context, she said, with the precision of someone who has thought about something for longer than this conversation. One that could be pursued if there were interest, through appropriate channels, at a time when the academic trajectory had reached a suitable point. You've been thinking about this, Cale said. I have been observing the situation, she said, as I do. And making notes. Mental notes, she said. I keep extensive mental notes. He thought about 14 months of negotiating with an empress for a single university term, about a woman who understood the 3,000-year mineral channels and the things that lived in them, and the cost of decisions made from too far above, about someone who had sat on a stairwell landing in November and let a stranger help her up, and held his arm across the quad, and said Veloran outside the medical center, in a voice she used for observations she meant precisely. I'm in the final year of my master's after the undergraduate degree, he said. That's 2.5 years. I know, Cyril said, the timeline is not immediate. But it's a timeline. It is a framework, she said with careful precision, for future consideration. When the relevant prerequisites are met. The sun was coming up properly now over the library roof, the thin winter light going warmer. Across the quad, Faraday Hall was already lit up inside, early arrivals, morning prep, the ordinary business of a campus day that was indistinguishable from any other day, except that 11 star systems were involved and the ice on the stairs had all melted. Okay, Cale said. She looked at him, okay. 2.5 years is enough time to finish a master's degree, he said, and to read up on cross-system regulatory alignment, and to get better at Vithrani, which I assume the subcommittee would appreciate. Sarah was quiet for a moment. The fractional smile moved at the corner of her mouth, not fractional this time, something more considered than that, something that was allowing itself to be more present. My mother, she said, will want to review your application. I figured, he said. She will be thorough. She reads daily briefings about morning walks across the quad, Cale said. I'm not worried about thorough. She looked at him for a moment with those silver-violet eyes in the winter light, and whatever was underneath the composure was very close to the surface, not breaking through, but visible, the way something is visible through clear water when you know to look. Veloran, she said softly. The second time she'd said it, and this time he knew what it meant. An observation, he said. An accurate one, she said. They walked to Faraday Hall together in the morning light, her hand in the crook of his arm not because she needed it, but because it had become, over 6 weeks and 5 days and a flagship in orbit, and an empress on a secure channel and 3,000 years of mineral channels, the way they walked. 3 weeks later, she returned to Varath Prime. The seminar notes arrived in her inbox every Friday for 2.5 years. And then, in the spring, a formal application was submitted to the Cross-System Regulatory Working Group, Human Systems Subcommittee, which was reviewed by the subcommittee chair personally, with thoroughness, and accepted.